Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you decided to join me today. My name is Dr. Jennifer Levin, and I am a grief therapist in Pasadena, California. And today we're going to be focusing on how to talk with adolescents about grief, activities that we can use to help them process what they're going through, and some red flags that we should be looking out for as well. I have muted everyone during the presentation this morning. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A folder, and my assistant Dee Dee will go ahead and answer them if she can, or she'll save them for me at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you're going to receive some information at the end of the webinar about how to see the recording as well. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn off my camera, and I am going to screen share again, and we will go ahead and get started. Okay. Oops. Let me get going here. All right, so I want to start off today by joining us together in the purpose of the webinar. Our goal for today is to learn how we can help adolescents who have experienced a loss and are living with grief. Before we get started, I invite you to silence your electronics and clear your physical and mental space. This may involve taking some grounding breaths, silencing your computers and phones, shutting your door, or even moving the piles in front of you to create openness and a sense of calm. Now, for those of you who do not know me, let me give you a brief introduction. I am a licensed marriage family therapist in California, and I specialize in traumatic grief, serious illness, and post-traumatic growth. I have a doctorate in public health from UCLA, and I'm also a recognized fellow in thanatology, which is the study of death, dying, and bereavement. I have over 25 years experience working in the field of grief and end-of-life care. In my private practice, I work with adolescents between the ages of 6 and 18 who have experienced the death of a loved one, and I also oversee a teen grief program. This picture here is my assistant, Winnie, who comes to work with me every day. The children and the teens I work with absolutely love having her in the office. This webinar is part of my new program, From Grief to Growth, an online self-help program for individuals who have experienced the sudden or unexpected death of a loved one. From Grief to Growth specializes in providing resources, online classes, and a forum for individuals to connect and begin healing after experiencing a traumatic loss. So let's jump in. My mission today is to equip you with tools to communicate with young people about grief and to understand what grief looks like in the younger population. To achieve this mission, we're going to focus on how to communicate with children and adolescents of differing ages and maturity levels about loss and grief. We're going to identify activities you can use to help children and adolescents with their grief, and how to cope with your own grief while parenting children and adolescents who are grieving as well. It's my hope that after this webinar, you're going to have a better understanding of how to talk to children and adolescents about death in an age-appropriate manner, how to identify normal and maladaptive grief responses, how to include children and adolescents in end-of-life care rituals, how to use activities and tools to talk their language, and how to parent while you're grieving as well. So the first thing that we need to cover is, what does grief look like among children and adolescents. And by the way, I'm using the word adolescents to refer to adolescents and teens. I want to start off by saying that children and teens express their grief differently than adults. In general, they tend to move in and out of intense feelings of sadness and are often focused on how a loss will directly impact them. I've been involved in telling children and teens that a parent has died and have witnessed such responses, including, well, are we still going to go camping this weekend? Or can I go out and play with my friends now? In addition, many adolescents are often reluctant to display signs of grief, including crying or sadness, because they fear that it's going to upset the grieving adult in their life. Many of my adolescents have said, I don't want mom to see me sad because that will make her sad, or I need to be happy so dad doesn't worry. It can be very concerning to a parent when a young person does not display what they perceive to be appropriate levels of grief or are focused on continuing with their normal life activities. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with parents who are concerned that their children is not grieving enough or able to express their emotions. Now, grief is incredibly destabilizing for a young person. Not only do they have to deal with the death of an important person in their life, but there are often many other changes associated with the death, including changing schools, a change in their social support, their living arrangements, and financial circumstances. And all of these changes directly impact their day-to-day life. Grief can also cause children and teens to feel different, alone, and that they don't fit in. Remember, peer relationships are a significant part of a young person's life. And if they feel they are different from their peers, this can be detrimental to their well-being, their development, and their self-esteem. In addition, grief is known to complicate developmental tasks associated with adolescence, along with social and academic performance. And as a result, many young children or adolescents will experience a regression of behavior or psychological struggles that have thought to have been previously mastered. In the teenage years, grief often shows up as irritability, withdrawal, difficulty in school, and trouble with interpersonal relationships. You may notice a change in mood, academic struggles associated with not being able to focus or concentrate, and trouble with friends or loved ones. Adolescents are often confused by their emotions and the emotions of the adults in their life. And yet there's often a reluctance between the adults and the children to communicate about these emotions. The good news is that children and adolescents are resilient, and with love, support, and grief services, they're going to be able to thrive even after the death of a loved one. So it's important to know that there are 4 things that a child must be able to grasp in order to understand death. The first concept is that death is universal and inevitable, and that all living things must die. Second, death is irreversible and it's permanent. Unfortunately, this is difficult for some young children to understand when they're watching TV or seeing video characters who die and then return to life right afterwards. The third thing is that death is final and physical function stops with death. And finally, there's a physical cause or reason associated with death, such as a heart that stops beating. Most children begin to have a strong awareness of these concepts by around age 7, but the exact age will depend on their maturity level. By around age 12, adolescents have an adult understanding of death, and are also able to comprehend changes that are associated with the death of a loved one. Now, like adults, grief impacts children and teens on a behavioral, cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual level. The following 2 slides provide a very general description of some of the responses some children or teens may exhibit at each level. Behaviorally, often we see an increased dependency on adults, a clinginess, not wanting to go to school, saying they feel sick, wanting to sleep with parents, needing extra help with tasks that are normally done alone, or some withdrawal. Cognitively, you might see a shortened concentration span, confusion, difficulty making decisions, nightmares, or low self-esteem. Emotionally, you may witness disbelief, numbness, sadness, abandonment, helplessness, anger, fear, and very importantly, anxiety about other people they love in their life dying. Physically, grief can be shown in headaches and tiredness, stomach aches, lack of energy, hyperactivity, restlessness, nervousness, appetite, or sleep change. And on a spiritual level, children might wonder, why did this happen? Will I ever see my loved one again or in heaven, depending on a family's belief system? Or, I already said that. Why did this happen, or will I ever see them again? So let's talk a little bit about red flags that may indicate a young person is not coping well with grief. As you can imagine, it can be extremely difficult to differentiate grief responses from common changes that occur with adolescence, puberty, and simply growing up. However, one of the best indicators of a grief struggle can be seen in the development of new behaviors or emotions that arise after a loved one has died. And again, these may include angry outbursts, hyperactivity, depression and anxiety, discussions or play about wanting to die, changes in appetite, nightmares, restlessness, inability to concentrate, clinginess, or physical complaints. Other red flags include feelings of guilt or responsibility for the death, self-blame for something they said or they didn't do, lack of communication, isolation, or withdrawal in teens, and in teens, substance abuse. Now, you're probably noticing that some of these red flags are also included in common grief reactions. Red flags are going to differ with every child and every age group. And if you're concerned about any of these behaviors, it's important that you talk with a school counselor, a physician, or a trained mental health professional. So now that you have a better understanding of how young people experience grief, let's focus on actually how to talk to them. Now, before beginning a conversation, I encourage you to go back to those 4 concepts of death and see where a young person is in his or her ability to understand them. And then to use those concepts to guide your communication. So when talking about death, it's important to have a direct conversation that includes the word death or died. You don't want to say gone, that they're sleeping, that they're in the hospital, because this may evoke fear later on in a child's life. It's also important to refer to the physical cause of death. Dad died because his heart stopped beating. When having a conversation, you want to remove any possibility of blame. Encourage the adolescent to express their feelings and describe and model your feelings during this conversation. It's okay to be sad and to cry when you talk about this with young adults. Let them know you're willing to talk about what happened as much as they need. And it's always a good idea to check in throughout these different conversations to make sure they're understanding what you're trying to communicate. Often adults wonder, how much should I tell a child? I encourage you to give enough information to answer any of these questions, but not to go into any unnecessary details. A child or adolescent will ask for more information if they want it and when they're ready. It's so important to continually reassure them that they're going to be okay throughout the entire process. When it comes to younger children or young adolescents, adults are often unsure what end-of-life rituals such as funerals, viewings, memorial services, or even seeing the body after death to expose them to. For children able to understand the four concepts of death, I encourage giving them a choice about what they would like to do. And to help them make an informed choice, they need a certain amount of information. They need to know who's going to be at the event, what's going to happen at the event, where is it going to happen, when is it going to happen, and the purpose for having this event. Without choice, children not allowed to attend a funeral may feel they didn't get a chance to say goodbye once they get to their adult years. And children who were forced to attend a funeral may later feel resentful. So there are lots of ways that we can help children and teens with their grief. And many of the activities that are listed here will differ by age and maturity level, but I want you to know it's an important way to communicate with children and to find a way to talk their language. These days, children of all ages are very connected to technology, and fortunately, there are a lot of online options to engage in the expression of grief. They can develop a playlist and listen to the music from somebody they love. They can engage in social media posting. They can also participate in online memorials. Other activities include engaging in reminiscent therapy and sharing memories, working on ongoing projects such as a memory book or building a memory box, and planning life celebration events, especially around birthdays and anniversaries. Whenever possible, I encourage you to let children and teens develop an activity or a group project to remember and honor their loved one. For younger kids, you can use art, play therapy, and storytelling to help them process their grief. For example, ask them to draw a picture of their family before and after their loved one died, or have them draw a picture of their sadness. Play therapy using dolls and stuffed animals can be very helpful in processing grief, along with reading stories and looking at old pictures. Now, you don't always have to talk about grief and death to help children cope. Any activity or interaction that fosters safety, routine, or trust can be just as important. So let's transition to what happens when parents and their children or teens are grieving together. One of the hardest things you can do as a parent is to have to care for somebody while you are coping with your own grief. While adolescents and adults express their grief very differently, they also go through similar questions and processes. It's important to remember that both of you are trying to process, why did this happen? How is my family going to be affected? And are we going to be okay? I commonly see that both adolescents and adults worry about how their grief is impacting one another and often hold back expressing their emotions for fear of upsetting the other person. There's also an increased concern for one another's safety. And this may result in kids becoming very clingy. I even have teenagers sleeping with parents after a death has occurred, or parents to become hovers or to engage in hovering and get very anxious if they're not able to communicate with their kids at all times. When there's a change in the family structure, adults need to be careful not to parentify teens by exposing them too much to adult decisions or intense grief emotions. This can actually increase or complicate a young adult's grief process. Many times, parents or adults will spend so much time focusing on the grief needs of their children or their teens that they ignore their own grief. Again, this can be problematic because it can result in delayed grief or complicated grief among adults later on. During this time, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of self-care and grief support for the adult to address their own grief needs so they can hold space and support young people who are grieving as well. And remember, despite all of this pain and sadness, grieving together also provides a unique opportunity to learn from one another and to grow closer together. The loss of a parent or a significant adult in the life of an adolescent is very traumatic. However, one of the most important things to remember is that kids of all ages are resilient, and with proper love and support, they're going to continue to grow and evolve to be healthy adults. So again, that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but I'm going to give you some resources so that you can get more information about any of these topics that we've addressed. What I'm hoping you took away today is that children and adolescents grieve differently. And it's important to talk with children and teens in an age-appropriate manner and take into account their maturity level. There are also so many activities available to help kids process their loss. And whenever possible, I really encourage you to give kids a choice about whether or not they want to participate in end-of-life care rituals. For parents, self-care and age-appropriate support is so important. And above all, you need to remember that kids are resilient. So the next few slides have different resources that I think you're going to find very helpful for children and teens experiencing grief. Tonight after the webinar, these resource slides will be emailed to you and will include all of the URLs. So first, I want you to know about some teen support groups. I cannot emphasize how important a teen grief group can be in helping adolescents with grief. Interactions with teens who've also experienced a death provides age-appropriate validation, normalcy, and connection during a very difficult time. Locally in Los Angeles, options for teen grief groups include Therapy Heals, Our House, and One Legacy. Second, there are many wonderful free summer weekend camps for kids and teens who have experienced the death of an adult in their family. Both Camp Aaron and Camp Kangaroo are local Los Angeles programs, and Comfort Zone is a national program. Please check their website for current offerings, as COVID-19 has impacted many of the schedules. Third, the best resource for learning about grief among children and teens is the Dougy Center in Portland, Oregon. Their website is full of resources for parents, teens, and professionals. It has books, podcasts, and activities to help children of all ages with grief. And finally, I encourage you to explore the National Alliance for Grieving Children to get some additional support. The next slide gives you some ideas of some good books. It also has workbooks and journals. The books for children are ones that I use in my practice all of the time, and there's so many different books available for teens that you can find online. I hope you check out these resources when they're mailed to you to get the information that you need to apply to your situation about adolescent and teen grief. So I want to end up by telling you about some future webinars that I will be having. On July 6th at 10 a.m., we're going to look at how to cope with a difficult part of traumatic grief, which is the inability to say goodbye. And on July 20th at 10 a.m., we're going to look at ways to increase the likelihood that traumatic grief becomes post-traumatic growth. So this is actually the end of my formal comments, and I'm going to stop the webinar slides and turn the video back on. I'm happy to answer any questions that have been entered into the Q&A. If you have to leave or want to touch base after the presentation, you're welcome to email me here at jennifer@grieftogrowth.com. And for those of you who are choosing to exit at this time, I want to thank you for participating in today's webinar, and I wish you well in your grief work. So let me stop sharing my slide and turn on my video and bring myself up to the front. Let me see how to do that there. Oh, gallery view. And I'm sorry, it's got my assistant Dee Dee's name. You probably can see that as well. And so she's here on the side. So are there any questions that people have about working with adolescents and teens? So, oh, here's one. What do you do with very young children when they're experiencing a loss? That's a great question. And there's actually a lot of things that you can do with children. As I mentioned in my practice, I usually see kids as young as 6, but I always have a parent present. So what I want to do is create a safe space for the kids so they enjoy coming to see me, they enjoy coming to see Winnie, they feel comfortable, they want to come back, and they know that at any time if they want to talk about things that I'm going to be there. I also do a lot of parent coaching during that time. I have activities and games that I'm playing with the kids and talking to them, and then actually talking to the parent at the same time, assessing sleep and routine and structure or any problems that they may be having. I will do drawings with the kids. I'll read a book. And usually with young children especially, I keep the sessions to 25 minutes so that it's short, it's playful, serious when it needs to be, but not too much. And then they can come back whenever they need to. So here's a question. How do we start a memory book? Oh, great question. Memory books are wonderful. Especially it's a wonderful gift that you can give to a young child or even a teen that they will cherish later on in their life. So I use both memory books and memory boxes. I actually go to Michael's and I get blank boxes, the old photo boxes, and I'll decorate them with kids. And we will throw important things or pictures or drawings or letters or any of that into the box. They'll bring it in each time. We'll talk about the activity or we'll talk about the item. We'll put it into the box. And then you can actually take the box contents and you can turn it into a book or a scrapbook, or you can just stay with the box. It also, usually with a memory book, you're telling a story. And so decide what story it is that you want to share or what message that you want the teen or the child to have when they look at it later in life, and design it that way. And a lot of the grief sites for kids have actual instructions for how you can go ahead and get one of those started. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions. Let me just check the chat here. There's a couple comments. Do you have resources for teachers? I teach at a county school for 6th to 12th grade. We've had a student die from an overdose right after we closed. And what are some resources for teachers and staff that would be greatly appreciated? So Kristen, go ahead and email me. Both myself and I know a couple of the organizations will come out and work with teachers. We'll work with students. Also, there's some curriculums available that I can point you in the direction of for schools on how to deal with a death of a student. So there's already work that's been done, and no need to reinvent the wheel there. So I think that's about it. Again, I'm always appreciative that you attend the webinars and that you're interested in learning this information to help other people who are dealing with grief. Best wishes to you and a wonderful, happy Monday. Take care.